I just got a notification. Staffing concerns, hiring, making sure we have people in place to do the job, and we're hitting our production goals and distributor goals and stuff like that. So happy to go into more detail wherever there's curiosity, but I'll cut it off there.
Great, thank you. And again, in no particular order, let's go ahead and kick it over to Dustin, if you wouldn't mind, sir. I know that Dustin was having a little bit of trouble with his connection earlier, so.
Hey everybody, how you doing? You guys able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, my name is Dustin Evans, and I am one of the owners and director of operations of Southern Roots Brewing Company. A little bit about me: I grew up in the Central Texas area. At 18, I thought I was smarter than everybody, ran away, joined the Army, and magically got stationed back in Central Texas. Then after I got out, I was attending Texas State University. During that time, breweries were kind of taking off all across Texas, and craft beverage was making its appearance. As Tommy could tell you, probably had already started quite some force out on the West Coast, and it was making its way inward on the continental side. And during that time, I became very fascinated with breweries, and we just sort of started exploring the business angles of it. And we met with a bunch of different brew pub owners and determined that, lo and behold, if you bring a good foundation of a business model to it, you can open a brew pub in your own neighborhood. So in 2018, we set out in earnest, and in 2019, we opened in Waco. For me, I'm no longer really on the brewing side, as much as I am sort of just managing the day-to-day operations, our distribution network, which is now in several grocery stores, and just sort of trying to wrangle this dragon as it gets bigger.
Thank you for your service, Dustin, by the way. Coming off Memorial Day, it certainly makes us reflect on those things. And so Mary, last but not least, could you share a little bit about yourself?
So my husband Curtis and I have a vineyard outside of Lorena. It's a little over 4 acres. We planted our first vines in 2013, and Curtis is just fantastic at growing grapes. So then we had the problem, we had more grapes than we could make wine of in the utility room by the washer and dryer. And so we built a winery. And we're trying to figure that out. So we opened the doors at the winery the end of January in 2019, coming off craziness with the government shutdown and label approvals and permits. And anyway, so opened in end of January of 2019, tried to be open in 2019, and then hit a pandemic in 2020. And now we're back open again, and we're trying to figure out what we're doing. It's all good.
I think we ask ourselves that question every day, Mary. So thank you. And actually, that's what this topic is about. It's about all stages of entrepreneurship and those taking the initiative to do something different. And we're excited to have you guys. So thank you. And so while we have you, let's go ahead and start with you, if you don't mind, with one of these questions. And so I'll reflect on my notes here because I don't want to misspeak these. And so. I did a little bit of research, obviously, coming into this meeting, and it turns out that wine, probably as no surprise, is considered the oldest alcoholic beverage in human history. I don't know if that's right or wrong. I came across some conflicting sources on that, but a lot has changed over that time, and it's not really considered to be just a craft art of personal preference. There's some really stringent curriculum and requirements to be met, and industry standards and big conferences and other things related to winemaking. And so how would you describe your winemaking? Is this something that you prescribe to, or is this something that where you kind of let your own instinct guide your winemaking? And this may be a question for your husband as well. So you guys both feel free to chime in.
As far as the winemaking part, I've taken several courses through a program called the VESTA program. It's the Viticulture, Enology, Science, and Technology Alliance. It's part of the National Science Foundation. They offer courses throughout the United States. They're online courses, and then you do your practicums at sponsoring vineyards and wineries in your area. So I've done my practicums out at Red Caboose. So that's where I developed some winemaking knowledge, and as well as just doing that process over and over again, and making a lot of wine. Curtis has gone to several conferences on grape growing, and he just has a natural skill for growing those grapes. We both grew up in farming families, so have some agricultural background, and he just naturally took to growing the grapes, so he produces wonderful grapes. I think you're muted.
Thank you. I think that's the third time I've done that today. I apologize, guys.
It happens.
One of those days, one of those weeks. And so thank you, Mary. And actually, while we have you, while I was actually doing this research, as I promised, I discovered that the United States drinks more wine than any other country in the world. And so that surprised me a little bit. You think of Italy, you think of France, you think of certain other countries. And this is not just a total volume number. Some of these numbers look like it's also per capita, which is a little particularly surprising. And so given that, it looks like there's a lot of competition, a lot of folks trying to get into winemaking. Is this something, is this an industry that's hard to break into? Are there any advantages that come from being in Central Texas versus maybe a more established part of the wine country in the United States? Could you tell us a little bit about winemaking in Central Texas?
I'm not sure. I'm trying to think of insights into that.
There are a lot of challenges. Hi, I'm Curtis. So I take care of the vineyard. I'm the yard boy, and Mary takes care of the wine. She has a passion for winemaking. And this area of Texas has its own challenges for growing grapes. We have certain soil conditions, of course, climate conditions, and just a natural pests that we have to control for. We've been to conferences and they help us prepare for this, but every year is a different challenge. Because Texas, the climate and soil is similar to Spain, we naturally come by grapes that are grown in Spain, and they tend to have a success here. But every season is a new challenge with new bugs and new fungi and soil conditions. Where the rainy season is wonderful, but it creates its own challenges with fungus and stuff. And so we're learning to get better every year and overcome some of these challenges.
Great. And I like to think that this is Texas soil. It's got to impart some of that Texas spirit into your wine, right? I don't know what that is. Maybe that's limestone, but there's got to be something special about saying, if nothing else, you can say it's from Texas, right? So we're proud of that. And so thank you guys for persevering in the face of those blights. And so, but this is great state. So Dustin, I think I'm going to pitch this next one at you. I was going to make a hops joke or something like that, but let's just go ahead and get into this. I would say our community has not historically been known for the craft scene. When people think of craft in Texas, they think Austin and other areas. But you guys have, we have just a very short list of folks, but you have kind of led the charge into this industry. And so what inspired you to jump into the craft scene? I know you touched on this a little bit in your intro, but could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. I think personally, one of the most fascinating aspects is going to all these different breweries and seeing that each of these locations take these individual inspirations, and then they just sort of create these things. And it's in the same way you would travel around and visit different restaurants, and every time you go, you have a unique experience. This is very much the same. And anyone who's traveled regionally can tell you that the beers in California are different than what they have in Florida, and it's such a unique window into different cultures in different parts of the United States and really anywhere in the world you go. So that was always really fascinating for me. And then beer was I guess I could make beer better than I could probably cook. So we took that angle and said, hey, we're going to try something unique and kind of make it our own.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. I mean, so we actually our team just returned from a groundbreaking for Ooze and Oots, which is a German company. And being a German company, there were quite a few jokes about, the number of breweries and such over there.
Mm-hmm.
So like you said, every country has its own perspective on this, and there are just so many varieties of beer. I won't get into how much I drink or anything like that, but I will say that I've tried a few, and so it is an exciting industry. It's almost it seems bottomless. There's so many variations and things to try and differentiate yourself, and so we appreciate you doing that. And I think if you don't mind, could I ask you one more question before we hop into the distilling questions? So basically, it's my understanding that there are some laws and regulations, and I'll probably ask this question of everyone at the end, given that we just wrapped up a legislative session. But I do know that there are some laws and regulations that are still on the books that may be considered archaic. Maybe they're from Prohibition era. Is that true, first of all? And then how does that impact what you're doing?
Yes, and to some extent, one of the biggest things, and without going too far into the weeds, is how the state of Texas identifies breweries and brew pubs and distilleries and wineries. To the consumer, you probably would never be able to tell the difference, but like Brotherwell is here today, and they and I actually have very different licenses. And what happens is there's certain things that they can do that I can't, and likewise, I have certain things that I can do that they can't. One of the good things that's come out of this really emergence of craft beer in Texas is that the state of Texas has tried to become proactive and create license tiers that allow more entrepreneurs to get into this business. The license I actually have is a brew pub license, which is actually a relatively new license for Texas. But what it's done is it allowed people like me, who aren't the biggest brewery in the world, to come into Waco and then have a neighbor down the street, Waco Ale, and around the corner. So one of the positive aspects is I think Texas has really tried to shed some of those old archaic laws and create an environment where, like I said, entrepreneurs and unique businesses can start to get access to the same markets that were formerly just reserved for Budweiser.
Exactly. That's a great answer. I was curious how that worked because it from a layman's perspective, it seems like there would be some pretty significant barriers to entry to try to get into the industry, especially on the that side, the permit side of things. And so that's great to hear that our state is working on that. And so just want to spread the love. So Tommy, I've got a question for you. It's hard. So the whole theme today is craft, and it's hard to say. You guys are so well known internationally. We can find your product on shelves internationally, and I know that we've shipped product overseas for multitude of reasons, and prospects and companies that we work with have loved your beverage anyway. So anyway, long story short, it's hard to say with a straight face that you guys are still craft, but is there a definition of what craft is? And are you guys still considered a craft distiller?
In beer, there's actually a tighter definition of what falls into craft and not craft. In distilling, it generally has to do with whether or not the company is owned by a larger international spirits conglomerate, which we are not. So even we've at several junctions kind of come to funny conversations, be it in staffing or in raw material procurement, where we are a uniquely sized distillery. We are much bigger than a lot of like Colorado mountain town distilleries that like rely on foot traffic for a lot of their sales. but we're much, much smaller than some of like the Buffalo Traces and Four Roses of the world. Diageo is kind of the largest international spirits conglomerate, and we are just like a tiny, tiny speck of dust compared to them. So yeah, we're in kind of a unique size. There's really not many distilleries that are at the size that we're at. Generally, they're tenfold larger, or they're like 10%, something like that. So it's kind of unique. But yeah, we're kind of a funny size in that regard.
Great. So, and I know that you guys are doing more than just whiskey these days as well. And so, just an interesting question. Again, I was doing some research, and it looked like there's something new that's kind of burst onto the scene in the last few years, and it looks like you guys are a pretty big player in that, and that is the American single malt. And so, I would love, first of all, I'd love to get my hands on some of that. I'm kind of curious. But secondly, could you tell us about that? So I know that flavored whiskeys and those sorts of things that you see in like the rum and vodka circles, those aren't really a thing for whiskey. Whiskey is such a complex flavor in its own right, and there's so many ways to do that. You don't have to add apricot to it to make it interesting. But the single malt seems like a unique evolution of the American single malt seems like a unique evolution of whiskey. So could you tell us about that, please?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think the first, I'll just briefly define there. I think a lot of American consumers will kind of equate the term bourbon and whiskey together, or they'll refer to one when they mean the other. To give a real quick definition, whiskey is the broadest category, and whiskey just means that it's a distilled spirit that's made from grain and aged in a barrel. But the kind of grain and the kind of barrel all impact whether it's bourbon or rye or single malt or corn whiskey or anything like that. Scotch, Irish whiskey, all those terms. Some of them are regional designations as well. But single malt specifically for us, and American single malt even more concisely, is a category that we've been playing with or operating in for not quite since the start of the company, but since probably 2009, 2010. And so single malt actually is made from malted barley, 100% malted barley, which is the same base grain that you would use to make beer. The first couple production steps are actually very similar to beer production, whereas things like bourbon is 51% corn, at least 51% corn, rye is at least 51% rye. So yeah, American single malt is not unique in alcoholic beverages in terms of the raw material, in terms of using malted barley, but it is unique in distilled spirits. And other countries such as Ireland and Scotland and even Japan have fully fleshed out definitions for what single malt is in those specific countries. But the US, America specifically, has been kind of behind on defining what American single malt is. So we're passionate about it because it's kind of a fledgling category that we're really excited about. But it's also kind of a unique time because we're at the forefront of helping define what that category actually means and what it's supposed to taste like, because there's not hundreds of years of Scotch distilleries that we're kind of, I mean, internationally, we're kind of standing on those shoulders, but within the American consumer perspective, there's just not really a lot of comparison. So it's somewhat uncharted territory, which is a lot of fun.
Great. And your name, well, not your name specifically, actually, I did see your name, but Balcones did come up multiple times in these very generic searches. So it definitely seems like you guys are leading the charge or involved in that vanguard in some capacity. And so,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So great job, guys. That's great. Awesome to have in our backyard. So, so I think now that everyone is familiar with the three different industries, I guess it's technically all part of the same industry, but three products. Let me direct a question at all of you guys, and feel free to chime in. You don't necessarily have to answer if you don't feel like it applies to you, but I will say, and I kind of touched on this earlier, we did just wrap up the 87th legislative session, and out of that session, we can all probably agree that it was a very energetic session, and a lot of things came out of that session. But is there anything in particular that's related to what you do in this particular topic that you were watching or paying attention to because you felt like it would either positively or negatively impact your operation or your industry?
it was looking like for a while. So we have a cap on bottle sales. We can only sell 2 bottles per person per 30-day period. And it was looking like for a while that even though that's a fairly small cap, it was going to double to 4 bottles per person, which really, it's not, I mean, you think like, oh yeah, 2 bottles in a month, like that should be enough whiskey for everyone, right? But it's more so whenever people travel through or they're not from Waco. If that bottle cap was listed, then someone could be traveling from a neighboring city or neighboring state and buy a larger amount and take it away for their home consumption over the course of weeks or months or years or however long. So those are the angle that not us, but really the industry broadly tried to take, was that by expanding that bottle bill, you can keep more money in the state rather than trying to have people purchase something in their own home state. You kind of capture a little bit more of that tourism and that traffic. But yeah, it was not successful. It ended up getting shot down. So we're still at that 2 bottles per 30-day landmark thing.
And this sort of thing is just intriguing to me, that, from a layman's perspective, just thinking, 2 bottles versus 4 bottles, what does that really mean? But the way you just laid that out, that's really interesting. So, so thank you for sharing that. If there's anything we can do, I don't know that we have a team that can directly help you in that capacity, but we do have a public policy component to what we do. And so maybe there's something we can help on that front. So, Dustin, Mary, anything you guys would, in your respective industries?
Specifically for my licensed here, there was nothing that really stood out for us this go around.
The same here. TABC is just reorganizing their systems right now, but that's just internally reorganizing the permits and how they're arranged and the fees for those, and how their regulation will be implemented.
Great. So that may be the best we could hope for. And so, but if there are any major limitations or inhibitions, any major limitations or something that we can assist with, certainly it'd be good for us to know, and maybe there could be some conversations had. So, so I've actually, my next question is another kind of everybody question. And so, yeah, I guess sort of it's a 2-part question. The first part is, and this, I think all 3 of you can answer this. What is your best seller and in your industry, and why do you think that is? And then the second part to that question is, what is your personal favorite, as in you, the presenter, what is your personal favorite? And are they one and the same?
I'll jump in. Our best seller through the tasting room is actually our single malt. So our American single malt. It's one of the pricier bottles that we have. And I think that it's a combination of folks wanting to come in and if they get a tour for a brother or sister or wife or husband or whatever, they do a tour as a gift. That sometimes happens. And then they want to grab a bottle as a gift too. They kind of tend to gravitate towards the flagship product that they've maybe heard about, or maybe it was the reason that they came. And I think also because we're able to kind of educate on that American single malt front within the tasting room, but broadly in the market, if we're talking about distribution, the #1 sellers are bourbon, our Texas pot still bourbon, which is the red label bourbon bottle there. And I think that probably has more to do, a combination of price point and also just the familiarity with the category. Like I said earlier, well, a lot of people think about whiskey, they think about bourbon. And so if people have heard about Balcones, they'll oh, okay, yeah, I've heard of bourbon, I've heard about Balcones, I'll go ahead and grab that one. So I think that it's useful to kind of be able to play in both markets, where sometimes you have the time to explain a more complex whiskey category, and sometimes people just want what they're familiar with. So we try to be both things there.
Thank you. And actually, let me broaden that question out a little bit. So on the what is your personal favorite question, is there something that maybe is underappreciated that you feel like we should all give a try? So, and Mary, this may be a question for you as well, because I personally am familiar with maybe 6 or 8 different varieties of wine. and they're the usual suspects, you know. And so, but there's got to be something out there that is just would be perfect for me, but I'm not aware of it, or you know, maybe I'm not adventurous enough to try it. So I imagine is there something? What is the most underappreciated beverage in your respective industry that you feel like folks should be open-minded and give a try?
Gosh, that's a big question. As far as our best sellers, we have about 6 or 7 different sweet wines that we offer, and people love those wines, and you just don't find sweet wines at every winery that you go to. Some winemakers look down upon sweet wines as not real wine. But you know, our deal is we want you to find what you like, not what somebody else is going to tell you you're supposed to like. And our job is to help you discover your new favorite wine and explore some options you never considered before. So our sweet wines are our favorites for our customers. As far as my favorite, Curtis has 2 beautiful grapes in the vineyard of our 5 varieties. One is Movedra. It's an ancient Spanish grape, and I love Movedra wine. I love the wine. I love making wine out of those beautiful grapes. It's just a real rich, earthy red wine that just has a lot to offer. And then we grow Lenoir. We have 5 rows, about half an acre of Lenoir, and people tend to look down on Lenoir, but we have a huge fan base for our Lenoir. We have people who come in and buy it a case at a time. Lenoir is a high tannin, big, bold, in-your-face grape, and it makes a big, bold, in-your-face wine. But it's just got so many layers, and you just have to embrace it and give it a chance. And we make that in a dry wine as well as a sweet wine. So there's just some good options out there. So I just encourage you to go to all the wineries in Central Texas. There are 9 of us, and just do a tasting at every single one of them. Find out what they have to offer, because every one of them is unique and they have great things to show you.
That is wonderful. Thank you, Mary. And that it's clearly evident how passionate you are about the wines and your art, and so that's really nice to see. And so I think I may be doing those. I may give those a try. So, and I'm more of a Pinot Noir sort of guy. You know, I like that earthy, the darks, and that sort of thing. And so it sounds like a few of those may be right up my alley. So we'll come check them out sometime. And Dustin, anything in your industry that is underappreciated, and what is your bestseller?
Well, our bestseller is probably our West of Czech Pilsner by a pretty significant margin. And the reason for that is it's very accessible. It's nothing too crazy. Somebody can walk in off the street and say, hey, I don't know if I like craft beer. We can start with a Pilsner. It's going to be pretty easy on the palate, nothing too extreme. And even if you're not crazy about the more dynamic aspects of craft beer, a Pilsner can be enjoyed over and over and over again without being too disruptive to your palate. And then second is interestingly enough, our sours, just sort of people go crazy over them. And they're a lot of fun to make because we typically get farm fresh fruit. Like we recently did dewberries, and we picked it from a farm in Lorena. And if you know anything about dewberries, they kind of only come in a certain time of the year, and you cannot fake that flavor. So it's a lot of fun. It's a way to kind of use local ingredients. And then if I could just really, a beer that I think it's a little looked over sometimes is a classic simple lager. I think it's underappreciated how difficult it is to make a very good, clean lager. If I go to visit a brewery out of town and they have just a very good amber lager, that's an impressive brewery. That's an impressive feat to do.
Wonderful, thank you. And I would agree with that on the Pilsners as well. So, you know, we actually, you guys, again, audience, please feel free to ask questions. I know we still have a few minutes left. I've got one more question to throw out, so get those questions in, and I'm happy to pitch those to the group. And but my last question is actually kind of directed, again, this is kind of an everyone question, but I'm kind of curious how this process of discovery works for you guys as you're launching a new product. I mean, obviously it must begin with an idea, but how it goes from there. And then it's sort of another two-part question, but once you've tried this product, have you ever gotten to the end and you thought it would be something amazing, and then you just get there and you say, nope, not going to do this one? Or you get to the end and it just totally blows your mind, maybe on something you made by accident. Have there ever been any instances like that for you guys?
I think part of my winemaking journey has been making a lot of bad wine. And that is always very sad when you get to that point and realize it, but there's so much to learn from that. And I take that very seriously. Curtis knows I do this. When I make bad wine, I will bottle some of that wine and I will keep it around the house. And every once in a while, I will make myself drink a glass of bad wine that I have made as penance. So I will never do that again. So that is just part of my ritual in growing, for whatever it's worth.
Absolutely, trial and error. And so on a personal aside, I make something called mead, which is made out of honey. And then I do the exact same thing. I have some awful bottles of mead, and I just reflect on those, and I can then compare how far I've come in the last few years. And so I'm right there with you on that. Dustin, Tommy, anything you guys would like to share?
Yeah, I think with whiskey, we kind of have the benefit of things aging for such a long period of time that we've certainly had stuff that we had intended to age for 4 years, and we realized at the 2-year mark, it's really ready to go, or vice versa, it's gone the other way, where we have a whiskey in barrel, and we were hoping to release it at the 2-year mark, and really it maybe needs more like 3 or 4. So we've had to wait on certain things just based on how it's tasting in that given point in time. Sometimes it doesn't have enough sweetness, or sometimes there's too much tannin intensity. So yeah, it's kind of been a balance there, just in terms of what we expect to happen, especially in a new product, versus what actually happens. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And Dustin, anything you'd like to share on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's we try to approach every beer with a strong foundation, and just over time you learn to kind of temper your expectations, and you control the variables you can. Sometimes when you reach the end product, you're not happy with it, but it's all subjective. We put out beers that I wasn't particularly thrilled with, but consumers are asking us, when will we make that again? So it's just sort of, you're your own biggest critic. If we're being frank, I hate every beer we make because I know we can make it better. But that's just part of being in this industry.
Great, yeah. Well, thank you guys. Actually, I'm sorry, we do have one question here. I don't know if this is a question for the panel, or I would be interested in your thoughts on this. The question is when are we going to get balsamic vinegar and olive oil production in Central Texas? I don't know if you guys can address that question. That may be something I follow up on after the fact and respond to. And we did just have another question come in, and the question is, how do we set up a tasting? Is it as simple as walking into your establishment, or do we need to plan ahead? So for your respective industries.
At our facility, you can go ahead and book a tour online if you're hoping to walk through and see the whole place. But in terms of doing a tasting, if you wanted to get a flight, or we actually brew beer as well, if you wanted to get a beer here, or a glass of wine, cocktail, whatever, you can actually just come up to our facility. We're downtown on 11th Street, kind of like 11th and Franklin, right across the street from Milo downtown, if you know where that is. But yeah, we have a little tasting tent out in the parking lot. That'll soon be a more permanent structure. We have kind of a construction project on the horizon there. But yeah, right now we're open Tuesday through Saturday, open at noon each day. Different closing hours depending on the day, but yeah, come on by.
Yeah, we're pretty much open door. We're open 7 days a week. Just walk in and wave, and someone will start pouring you beer. I promise.
It's true. I've been.
And we're open Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, 1 to 7, and you can just come in during the time, any of those times, 1 to 7, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and we'll help you do a tasting. We're glad to take care of you.
All right, guys. Thank you, everyone. This has been a very interesting conversation. I've learned a lot from you guys. And so, of course, again, if anyone has any follow-up questions that occur to you later after the fact, you know how to get a hold of us here at the Chamber. Feel free to send me an email or give me a call, and I can get it to the right folks. Otherwise, a big thank you to Tommy, Dustin, Mary. Thank you for taking this time to share with us some of your insights and your industry experience. We are thankful that we have some great up and coming companies and right here in our backyard, and we look forward to great things coming from everyone. So with that, I think we will call it a day, but one last shout out to our sponsors. Again, these folks make it happen. So American Guarantee Title, Chuck, if you're still out there, thank you. Kelly Realtors and the Cohen Mortgage Group. So thanks to everyone, and we'll see you probably late August.
Thank y'all.
Y'all.